2 months later, the halls of the Adventurers Guild in Elandra felt different. Not quieter, never that, but lighter. The war room was no longer filled with frenzied shouting or the clatter of emergency dispatches. For once, the parchment stacks were lower, the messengers fewer, and the tension that usually weighed on everyone's shoulders had finally begun to lift. Victory did that. Across the continent, the last 2 anchor points had been destroyed. Cleansing operations had confirmed that the demonic trace had stopped spreading. Mages reported that the veil between worlds was stabilizing, and even the High Temple had issued a rare proclamation of thanks to the Guild. It was in every sense a turning point. So tonight, Guildmaster Thorn had called for a gathering. Not a ceremony, he clarified dryly to his aides. Adventurers don't care about medals. Feed them, let them drink, and give them a few hours to remember that they're still alive. And so they had. The long banquet hall on the 3rd floor, usually reserved for high-ranking guests and dignitaries, had been stripped of protocol. Tables were pushed together into long mismatched rows. Plates piled high with roast venison, thick stew, salted fish, and baked bread filled the space. Jugs of ale and fruit wine passed freely. Laughter bounced off stone walls. It wasn't elegant, but it was real. Inigo sat at the end of one of the middle tables, a plate half full and untouched in front of him. He watched the others for a moment, taking it all in. Lyra was perched on a bench to his left, arguing playfully with Korik over who had the better reflexes. "You got hit 3 times in Hollowmere," she said between bites. "And don't even try to say that one was a glancing blow." Korik scowled into his mug. "I was baiting the spawn. That was strategy. You tripped over a root. A strategic root." Inigo smirked quietly and looked across to Ariane. She was seated beside Garen, a wine glass in hand, leaning back as if she could finally exhale. Her eyes caught Inigo's for a moment and she offered a small smile. He returned it, then finally picked up his fork. Thorn, standing at the far side of the room near the head table, cleared his throat. Not loudly, but even so the room began to settle. The man hadn't spoken much since this operation began, but everyone knew when the guildmaster stood, you listened. "I won't take long," he began, holding a goblet of dark red wine. "You've all earned better than speeches." A low chuckle rippled through the room. "But I'll say this. 2 months ago we weren't sure how many of you would make it back. I reviewed those initial reports myself. All 3 anchor points were far more entrenched than we expected. And yet," he gestured around the hall, "here you are." Some raised their mugs. Some just nodded. But all listened. "We've bought time. Disrupted the cult's network. Closed the paths they were carving through our world. And maybe, we've even made them afraid for once." There were cheers at that. Loud ones. Someone at the far table even stood and yelled, "To making demons afraid of us." Thorn didn't smile, but his eyes warmed. "Enjoy your evening. You've earned it." The room erupted in applause and the feast truly began. Music followed, courtesy of a bard squad from the local academy, young, eager, and far too loud, but no one minded. Lyra grabbed Inigo's wrist and dragged him up from his seat to dance. He resisted at first, claiming he had no rhythm, but she rolled her eyes and pulled him anyway. "Come on, Mr. Brooding Soldier," she teased. "You saved the continent. You can manage a 2-step." He eventually caved and let himself be pulled into the laughter. His steps were stiff at first, but Lyra's energy had a way of making everyone around her lighter. By the 3rd song he was even smiling without realizing it. Korik, meanwhile, challenged 2 younger adventurers to an arm wrestling contest, and beat them both with only one hand. "You need more than youth and enthusiasm," he growled as he slammed their wrists to the table. "You need experience and beef stew." Ariane stayed mostly seated, content to sip her drink and enjoy the noise around her. Garen occasionally nudged her with his elbow, encouraging her to eat more. "Come on," he said. "This is the part where we pretend to be normal." She snorted. "Define normal." He tilted his head. "Not nearly dying every week?" "Fair." As the night wore on, groups shifted, stories were shared, and the atmosphere grew warmer. Adventurers who had only nodded in passing before now shared drinks. Those who had once been rivals compared scars. And for just one night the walls of the guild didn't feel like a fortress, but like home. Late into the evening, Inigo found himself standing near the open windows at the edge of the banquet hall, looking out over Elandra. The city was quiet, bathed in the golden glow of lanterns and moonlight. Below, the streets were calm. No alerts. No calls for reinforcements. Just peace. Ariane stepped up beside him. Thinking again? I don't know how not to, he admitted. She leaned against the frame, folding her arms. We stopped something big. I know it doesn't feel like it all the time. But we did. He nodded slowly. I just keep thinking, if we missed even one site, if there's another anchor point buried somewhere we didn't see, then we find it, she said simply. Together. That's how we've done everything. A pause passed between them. Inigo finally said, It's strange. I never thought I'd live long enough to see a victory. She glanced sideways. And now that you have? He looked out at the city again. Now I think we have to protect it harder than ever. Ariane smiled faintly. You're not wrong. Back inside, Thorn had sat down at the head table at last, though he kept sipping water instead of wine. He watched the room with a quiet satisfaction, arms folded, legs crossed. His aides were still on standby, of course they always were, but even they looked a little more relaxed. Korik was now teaching a group of rookies how to throw a hatchet indoors, much to the horror of the guild's maintenance staff. Lyra and Garen were seated together again, their cheeks red from drink and laughter. She leaned against him lightly, letting the moment settle. We will continue on our original mission, right? She asked. He grinned. If we didn't encounter something like that, we will. And if we're unlucky? He raised his mug. Then we're ready. By the time the feast ended, the moon was high, the food was mostly gone, and the wine barrels had run dry. But no one complained. The mood was calm, content. Not triumphant, not roaring, but steady. Earned. Inigo and the rest of his team lingered in the hallway just outside the banquet hall, armor off, jackets open, and breaths long. First night I haven't dreamed about Hollowmere, Lyra admitted quietly. Korik nodded. Same. Inigo glanced at them all, his team, his friends, and finally allowed himself to relax. Let's not waste it, he said. And for once there was nothing more that needed saying. They stood there for a long while watching the city sleep. Tomorrow there would be more missions. More threats. Maybe even more darkness to face. But tonight was theirs. And for the first time in a long time, it was enough. The next morning came slowly with the kind of warmth only quiet victories bring. Sunlight filtered through the stone windows of the Elandra Guild dormitory, casting long stripes across the floor where a pair of boots sat, muddy, worn, and finally unmoving. Inigo stirred in his bed, blinking against the golden light as he sat up. For once his muscles didn't ache from battle, and the air didn't carry the tension of an impending mission. It was quiet, peaceful. The kind of morning most adventurers forgot could exist. He stood, stretched, and grabbed a shirt off the back of a chair. His jacket hung nearby, but today he left it behind. No armor either, just a simple white tunic and dark pants. Civilian clothes. A rare treat. Outside his room of the inn, he checked in as he wouldn't want to get his own place be dirted. The streets was just beginning to wake. Staff swept the halls. Clerks yawned as they checked their boards, and the faint scent of bread drifted in from the lower kitchen. Most of the patrons were still asleep. He headed down to the courtyard, boots scuffing lightly against the stone floor, and found Lyra already waiting by the fountain. She was wearing a loose brown blouse, her bow nowhere in sight for once. Her hair was tied up messily and she looked more relaxed than he'd seen her in months. You're late, she said as he approached. You said morning, Inigo replied. This still counts. She handed him a paper cup. Coffee. Strong. No sugar. He took it and took a sip. Tastes like a punch to the throat. Exactly how it should be, she grinned. They didn't speak for a moment, just leaned against the edge of the fountain and watched the rising sun spill over the rooftops of Elandra. Merchants were setting up their stalls in the distance. Guards walked their routes in the outer circle of the city. Normalcy for once looked real. So, Lyra said, nudging him with her elbow. We actually have a day off. What now? Inigo tilted his head. No idea. Come on, she rolled her eyes. You must have thought about it. All those weeks underground and in Hollowmere and on the road, don't tell me you didn't dream of something. A bath that lasts more than 3 minutes? She laughed. Fair. But let's do something. Something stupid. Something normal. He glanced sideways. Like what? A walk. No, she said, already pulling him along. We're going to the market. The market? Yes, she grinned. And then maybe the river and then maybe the bookshop. I heard they restocked. And if you behave, I'll even buy you a pastry. He sighed but didn't resist. Fine. They walked through the streets of Elandra, the city's heartbeat steady around them. The marketplace buzzed with morning life, stall vendors calling out deals, children darting between crates, and the smell of grilled fish rising from the food corner. Lyra made a beeline to a stand selling woven bracelets. Really? Inigo asked, raising an eyebrow. You've fought demons but can't handle a bit of shopping? He crossed his arms. There's a difference between fear and boredom. She ignored him, tried on a red bracelet, frowned, then tossed it back. Inigo watched the crowd instead. Peaceful people, laughing civilians, fresh fruit on the tables, no weapons in sight. It was a good day. After several stalls and a light argument over whether a spiced bun counted as breakfast or dessert, they reached the riverbank. The water shimmered under the sun, ducks lazily drifting downstream. Lyra sat on the edge, pulling off her boots to dip her toes in the water. Inigo sat beside her, back against a smooth stone, sipping what remained of his coffee. You know, Lyra said, voice calmer now, I didn't think we'd ever get a break like this. He looked out at the water. Me neither. I thought we are already set off to the demon realm, haha. She leaned back on her hands, eyes to the sky. I too think about it. But look what's happening, always returning to the city because of the sudden circumstances that needed solving. And now we are going to leave again soon, and this time I hope this is for real. She smirked. Exactly. A bird flew overhead, dipping low near the water before vanishing behind a cluster of trees. They sat like that for a while, saying little, simply existing. It was strange, Inigo thought. To have nothing urgent to do. No hunt. No ritual. No warnings. I got a letter, Lyra said after a while. Oh. From Serena. She said that she missed you. When are you going to see her? Maybe after we depart. A girl miss you? Look, we are friends and of course it's only natural that a friend would miss you, Inigo explained, sensing that the girl is getting jealous. Perhaps you two can spend some time alone, catch up. Lyra smiled, but that wasn't a kind smile. I don't think you'd be so kind as to let that happen. You are going to kill me. No, I won't get mad or anything. You are free to interact with whomever you want. I don't think I'm going to take that chance, Inigo said dismissively. Eventually the sky began to shift, afternoon creeping in. They stood and wandered back into town, passing the bookshop on the way. True to Lyra's word, she bought him a pastry, honey-glazed and warm. He didn't say it aloud, but he appreciated the gesture. They returned to the inn just as the sun dipped low. Inigo and Lyra lingered at the entrance before heading up the stairs. Ready for tomorrow? She asked. Yet I can't wait to beat some demons, if you know what I mean. She nodded as she chuckled. Sure you do. Then let's get some rest. We can't afford to have our driver sleeping on the road. I didn't sleep. You literally fell asleep momentarily while we were heading back. It was a tactical nap. She rolled her eyes and stepped into the hallway. The sky was overcast by the time Inigo and Lyra left the guild hall. What began as a steady wind had turned into a biting gale, tugging at the hems of their cloaks and whispering through the narrow streets of Elandra. The city felt different now, less celebratory than it had been the night before. After weeks of peace, the sudden assignment carried a familiar tension. They walked side by side through the western gate, passing sentries who gave short nods of respect. News traveled fast in Elandra. The moment word spread that another rift had opened, and so close no less, there wasn't time for hesitation. Lyra glanced over as they passed a bakery. Still think that pastry was worth it? Honestly. Inigo adjusted his pack. Might be the last one I get for a while. So yes. The road to Windspire was dry, but the air felt wrong, like the wind was pressing down, not just sweeping past. A lingering pressure, almost unnatural, settled over the landscape as they moved into the open hills. They were nearing familiar ground. The cliffs, jagged and steep, loomed in the distance like the edge of a blade. This place had already been the site of violence. Now it was becoming something worse. They arrived at the first overlook just before midday. The same broken tower they had used for observation months ago still stood, though more eroded than before. They climbed it in silence, the crunch of gravel and wind the only sound between them. At the top, Inigo pulled out his scope. Lyra leaned her elbows on the edge of the stonework. You see it? He adjusted the scope, then tensed. Yeah. It's there. Down below, nestled between two ridges of the cliffs where wyverns had once roosted, a glowing fissure pulsed in the rock. Faint purple light bled out from the cracks, swirling like vapor. No wyverns this time. No nests. Just the rift. Wide open. Rift. We can now confirm back to the guild that a rift appeared in Windspire, Lyra said. In a place where we hunted down wyverns. I know, to think that one would appear near Alandra. Well, at least we won't have to travel hundreds of miles anymore. We have to inform Guildmaster Thorn about this and regroup with Ariane and Korik. Lyra gave a short nod, already turning to descend the broken tower steps. Let's not waste time. Every hour that rift stays open is a risk. The wind howled louder now, like it had picked up on their urgency. Inigo adjusted his coat and followed, boots crunching against the loose stone as they made their way down. The sky had begun to gray, heavy clouds rolling in from the west. Ominous but fitting. The road back to Alandra was familiar, but their pace was different this time. Quicker, tighter. No time for idle talk, no time for distractions. They moved with purpose, cutting across the hills and valleys like the trail was already mapped in muscle memory. By the time the outer walls of the city came into view, the sun had nearly dipped beneath the horizon. Lanterns lit the streets with a warm amber glow. The guards at the west gate recognized them instantly, waving them through without question. Inigo offered only a curt nod as they passed, Lyra trailing beside him with her hood now drawn up against the wind. They crossed into the main square and turned toward the guild hall, pushing through the heavy front doors just as the bell tower rang once to signal the arrival of dusk. Inside, the guild hall was busy but not chaotic. Adventurers spoke in low voices over bowls of stew and mugs of ale, while the staff moved between tables and posted new assignments along the eastern wall. Elise stood behind the central desk, scanning a parchment with a furrowed brow. She looked up as they approached. "You're back quick," she said, eyes narrowing. "That's either a good sign or a bad one." Inigo didn't waste time. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded map, laying it flat on the counter. "We found the source. Rift's active." "That's bad." Elise didn't hesitate. She turned, signaling to one of the runners stationed near the board. "Go upstairs. Tell the guildmaster we need him. Immediately." The runner bolted up the steps. Elise returned her gaze to them. It's not good. A rift close to Alandra." "Not anymore," Inigo said quietly. Minutes later, the upper doors opened and Guildmaster Thorn descended the staircase with his usual silent authority. His coat was buttoned high and his silver-streaked beard was sharper than usual. He walked straight to the desk, his gaze flicking briefly to the open map. "You confirmed it?" he asked. Lyra gave a crisp nod. "Yes. It's stable. And natural. A clean tear like Hollowmere, but no decay yet." Thorn stared at the markings on the map for a long moment. Then he looked up. "Where are the others?" Inigo straightened. "Ariane's still recovering in the city. Korik should be at the barracks." Thorn turned to Elise. "Send for them. They'll want to hear this." The runner was dispatched again. Inigo and Lyra stepped aside while the guildmaster reviewed the report in full, murmuring with Elise about containment procedures and possible magical interference. Within 10 minutes the doors opened again, this time revealing Ariane and Korik. Ariane looked like she'd been pulled straight from bed, but alert as ever, her coat thrown over her shoulders and tracefinder already in hand. Korik, on the other hand, looked like he'd been in the middle of dinner. He was still chewing something as he walked in. "What's the panic?" Inigo gave them both a nod. "We've got a new rift. Windspire Cliffs." Ariane's expression turned serious immediately. "So it's true then. You four will go in and then hope that it won't be a cavern like before," Thorn said. "We hope so," Inigo replied. "I do want to see the Demon King myself." "Okay, you four will depart immediately," Thorn said. The next morning came with a sharp chill in the air. Alandra stirred slowly beneath the gray dawn, clouds hanging low over the rooftops like a heavy blanket. Inigo stood by the outer gates of the guild, checking the straps on his gear. His long coat was cinched tight, weapons holstered, and a fresh utility belt hung at his side. He wasn't nervous. Not exactly. But there was something about a rift appearing this close to home that unsettled him more than Hollowmere ever did. Lyra joined him shortly after, tightening her bowstring while chewing on a bit of dried jerky. "You ready?" she asked, eyes flicking briefly to the west where the cliffs waited. "As I'll ever be." He gave a glance toward the guild. "They're coming." Sure enough, a few minutes later, Ariane arrived, coat buttoned up and eyes sharp. No trace of fatigue remained from the night before. She adjusted the strap on her satchel and gave a curt nod. Thorn packed us supplies. Antitoxin, burst stones, and another beacon. And then Korik appeared, stomping up the steps with a great sword slung across his back and a full loaf of bread in one hand. "I'm here, I'm armed, and I'm fed," he said around a mouthful. "Let's go kill some nightmares." They left through the western gate just as the bells of morning rang out across the city. The journey to Windspire was short. Too short. Normally, their missions took them days out, far beyond the civilized lands. But this was practically in their backyard. As they walked, no one said much. The wind was sharper now, and the clouds above turned in slow, ominous spirals. Birds avoided the cliffs. No distant calls. No sounds of grazing herds. Just the wind and their footsteps. By the time they reached the base of the cliffs, the sun had barely risen past the ridgeline. The broken tower loomed once again as they approached it from the eastern trail. They climbed up for a final survey before breaching. The rift was still there, stable, pulsing, humming low like a deep-throated growl from beneath the earth. "Same as yesterday," Inigo said, lowering his scope. "It hasn't spread." Ariane knelt, drawing a rune in the dust beside her foot. "No distortion yet, but the pressure in the air. It's similar to Hollowmere but denser. Like something's pushing from the other side." "Trying to come through," Lyra added. Korik unsheathed his sword. "Then let's not keep it waiting." They descended to the base of the cliffs and stood before the rift. It wasn't like a door, more like a wound in the world. The stone around it had warped slightly, edges cracked and glowing faintly. Violet energy swirled in the center, slow and deliberate like it was alive. Ariane raised the beacon stone. "I'll plant it here. If we don't come back in 6 hours, they'll know something's wrong." "Let's make sure we don't need it," Inigo said. Together they stepped into the rift. The sensation was always the same, like cold water rushing over skin, followed by a brief moment of weightlessness and then solid ground again. They landed on dark stone. The sky above them wasn't a sky. It was a swirling void of red and black, clouds moving far too quickly as if time didn't behave properly here. They stood on a jagged platform of blackened rock, surrounded by towering cliffs of crimson crystal. A faint wind howled through the chasms, but there was no source. No sun. No moon. Just the faint glow of volcanic fissures and red mist. Korik turned in a slow circle. "This is definitely the demon realm." "Yeah, just as described by Elise to me before," Inigo replied. Inigo walked toward the only visible path forward. A narrow bridge of cracked stone that connected their platform to a much larger landmass further ahead. On that larger ground stood something unnatural. A tower. Twisted. But pulsing. It looked grown, not built. Like it had been summoned up from the bowels of the world and molded by some cruel hand. At its peak was a flare of violet energy, stretching toward the void above like a beacon. "That's our target," Ariane said quietly. "You think the Demon King's in there?" Lyra asked. "No," Inigo said. "But whatever's inside, it's meant to prepare the way." They began crossing the bridge, weapons ready, senses on edge. Halfway across, the wind changed. It wasn't real wind. Not air. Not pressure. It was whispering. Inigo stopped. So did the others. The whispers weren't loud. Present. Like the voice of something ancient brushing against their ears. No words. Just intent. Hostility. Lyra's grip tightened on her bow. "This place doesn't want us here." Korik stepped forward. "Good. I've been waiting to make something regret that." They reached the other side and found themselves at the edge of a wide, flat expanse that led to the base of the Black Tower. Nothing stirred. No movement. No creatures. Just the oppressive air and a long, broken pathway of scorched stone leading straight to the entrance. Then a rumble. Like thunder. But below them. Inigo looked down. The ground cracked. From the fissure burst a creature. Not a demon like the ones they fought before. This one was larger. Leaner. Covered in plated bone with glowing purple eyes. It shrieked as it landed on all fours, its head shaped like a twisted helm of jagged blades. More shrieks followed. 3. Then 5. Then a dozen. Creatures burst from the ground like insects. Contact! Inigo shouted. Circle up. Ariane threw a burst stone at the first creature, blinding it momentarily. Korik rushed in, greatsword swinging in an arc that cut deep into bone. Lyra's arrows sang through the air, pinning two to the ground with perfect precision. Inigo fired his sidearm, bullets glowing faintly from the enchantments Ariane had laced them with the night before. Each impact tore through the creature's outer plating, but not without cost. One of them barreled past and rammed him straight in the chest, sending him sprawling. Lyra loosed another arrow and dropped the beast before it could pounce again. Get up, she yelled. I'm up, he grunted, scrambling to his feet. Ariane. Rift magic is saturating the field, she shouted back, ducking as a claw swiped over her head. They're stronger the closer we get to the tower. Then we don't give them the chance. Korik roared as he slammed his blade down, bisecting two more. Just keep pushing. One by one they dropped the beasts until the last of them fell with a gurgled shriek, fading into mist. Panting, weapons drawn, the four stood in a ring, backs to each other, waiting for more. Nothing came. Just silence. And the looming tower ahead. This was just the welcoming party, Lyra said, breath still short. We breach that tower, Inigo said. Find out what's causing this. And if it's summoning more. We shut it down, Ariane finished. They moved forward again, slower now. The path led them to the base of the tower where a gate, a maw yawned open, breathing out violet mist. There were symbols etched along the walls, glowing dimly. Some of them pulsed with each heartbeat. Inigo reached the threshold. No turning back now. He looked over his shoulder once. His team stood with him. Then he stepped through. And the tower swallowed them whole. The inside of the tower was alive. Not metaphorically. Not spiritually. Literally. The walls pulsed faintly, covered in some kind of organic film that writhed when touched by the violet mist drifting from the floor. Each step echoed wetly, as though they were walking across a stomach lining instead of stone. Inigo's boots stuck slightly with each step, like the tower itself didn't want to let them go. Disgusting, Korik muttered, wiping his blade across his cloak like it might be tainted just by the air. No more disgusting than Holomir, Lyra replied, though her voice lacked humor. Her bow was drawn, arrow nocked. She was tense. Inigo raised his M4, sweeping his scope left to right. The weapon felt heavier in here, not because of weight but because of the pressure building in the air. A feeling like walking into a trap. They moved deeper. The tower's corridor widened into a massive chamber lit by unnatural light. Glowing pods embedded in the walls throbbed like infected boils. Some pulsed. Others twitched. A few dripped viscous liquid into the floor. It stank of sulfur, rot, and something worse. Magic. Then sound. A slow, deliberate clicking. Metal against bone. Inigo raised a fist. They stopped. From the far end of the chamber, two figures emerged. The first was tall, nearly 7 feet, encased in black, jagged armor with glowing cracks of blue energy running through him. His sword was massive and wickedly serrated, resting over one shoulder like it weighed nothing. His helm fused into his face, and his steps rang with calm purpose. The second figure floated. She didn't walk. Her robes trailed across the floor like shadowed water, her skin pale and tattooed with glowing runes. Her hair flowed behind her unnaturally, and her eyes burned with a dull violet glow. No breath. No blink. She raised one hand. The ground answered. All around them the organic floor began to bubble and tear. First in small patches, then violently, gaping open like burst wounds. Rotten flesh, bone, and twisted limbs erupted upward as the undead clawed their way into the chamber. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Some had no eyes. Others had too many. Their arms were made of sharpened bone, fused weapons, or muscle-stitched flesh. Some dragged shattered shields or worn armor. Others had no legs and slithered like eels. Korik stepped forward, sword raised. I hate necromancers. Ariane moved behind him and slammed a warding sigil onto the floor. These aren't normal undead. Inigo raised his rifle and chambered around. Then full send. Light 'em up. The necromancer floated back, her hand still outstretched. The armored demon remained rooted, watching. Then the horde charged. Inigo was the first to fire. Muzzle flash lit the dark as he unloaded short bursts, his rounds tearing through the first wave. Their bodies burst apart in puffs of rot and viscera, but it barely slowed the rest. Lyra's arrows followed, dropping 3 more before they could reach striking distance. Korik met them head-on, sword cleaving clean through one, then another, bones snapping with each blow. Ariane flung out both hands. A burst of fire shot across the ground, igniting a group of undead who screamed as their limbs twisted and curled in flame. But more poured in. Inigo ejected a mag, slammed in a fresh one and switched to semi-auto. He picked off targets near Ariane, protecting her flank as she set up another barrier. "She's just standing there," Lyra shouted, dodging a swipe. "Like she's waiting." "She's testing us," Inigo replied, firing point-blank into a twisted ghoul trying to leap. "That knight's her judge." The armored figure still hadn't moved. His blade remained resting on his shoulder and his glowing eyes were locked onto them. Watching. Evaluating. Korik smashed through 2 undead with a spin, then planted his foot and shouted, "Then let's pass the test." Inigo pulled the RPG from his back. "Clear the path." "What?" Lyra blinked. "Fire in the hole." Inigo dropped to one knee. The rocket whooshed out with a roar, streaking across the chamber and slamming into a dense cluster of undead near the tower's far side. The explosion rocked the walls. Flame, smoke, and blood burst outward as bodies were flung in every direction. The shockwave knocked a few others off balance, and the chamber grew quiet just for a second. A moment later, fresh holes opened in the walls and ceiling. More undead spilled through. Lyra loosed an arrow into a charging brute's face and yelled, "That didn't slow her down at all." "It wasn't for her," Inigo said, slinging the RPG back and switching to his rifle. "It was for us." "Cover me," Ariane called. "I'm unraveling her barrier." Korik bellowed as he waded toward the summoner. Every swing of his blade sent limbs flying. Lyra moved in tandem, nailing threats that closed in from Korik's blind spots. Inigo pushed forward as well, controlled bursts from the M4 carving a path through rotting masses. The necromancer turned slightly. Her expression hadn't changed, but her eyes glowed brighter. She raised both arms now and from above something dropped. It hit the ground with a sickening thud. 10 feet tall. Made of multiple corpses, stitched and spliced with claws, teeth, and limbs where they didn't belong. 3 arms, each holding a different weapon. A jagged cleaver, a massive hammer, and a set of hooks fused into its flesh. Its torso opened vertically, ribs spread wide like a second jaw. "Back up!" Inigo shouted. Too late. The monster lunged forward. It caught Korik's blade mid-swing, twisted it, and backhanded him across the room. The impact sent him flying into one of the pulsating walls. The structure absorbed the hit, squelching with a sickening noise. Korik groaned. "Stay on it." Inigo stepped forward, rifle raised, and fired at the beast. The round struck, but not deep enough. Its hide was too dense, too reinforced. Ariane turned and fired a beam of concentrated magic at the abomination's left leg. It stumbled. Lyra rolled, ducking beneath a wide swing and jammed a dagger into one of its twisted joints. It hissed but didn't fall. The necromancer's eyes flicked downward. She didn't like that. Inigo swapped mags and sprinted past the beast, sliding beneath its swipe and coming up near Ariane. "How long?" "Almost done." "We need seconds," he shouted, grabbing a frag from his belt. He tossed it under the creature and dove. The grenade detonated. It staggered the beast, rocking it backward. A huge chunk of flesh and fused bone tore free from its side, leaking glowing black blood. Korik, battered but alive, stood up groaning. "I'm not missing this." He charged again, slower but with twice the fury. The abomination turned, and Korik slammed his sword down, cleaving one of its arms clean off. Ariane followed with another blast of fire, and Lyra's arrow found the exposed core in its ribs. The monster shrieked, and collapsed in a heap of twitching limbs and smoke. But before they could regroup, the armored demon stepped forward. His steps were slow, deliberate. Each one cracked the floor beneath him. He drew his sword. A low, resonating hum filled the chamber. Energy coiled around him like smoke from a dying star. The walls seemed to pulse harder in rhythm with his movements. Get ready, Inigo said, lifting his M4 and flipping it to full auto. The summoner hissed something ancient, and vanished into smoke, retreating into the shadows. She was done testing. The real battle was beginning. The demon raised his sword with one hand, and pointed at Inigo with the other. Then he charged. And the chamber exploded into violence again. The demon came fast. Faster than anything that size should have been capable of. Inigo barely had time to dive aside as the monster's massive blade cleaved the space where he had stood a second before. The impact cracked the ground, spraying shards of stone and organic fluid into the air. Korik left. Inigo shouted. The warrior swung his greatsword wide, but the demon caught it mid-strike with one armored gauntlet and twisted. Metal screeched, sparks flew, and Korik was flung backward again. Damn it! Lyra loosed an arrow toward the demon's eye. It deflected harmlessly off its helm. His armor's too thick. Ariane yelled from the side, hands glowing as she prepared another spell. Inigo fired. His M4 carbine roared, enchanted rounds slamming into the demon's chest. The impacts sparked against the obsidian-like plates, some chipping away fragments, but they barely slowed it down. He saw it with his own eyes. The bullets were doing something. Just not enough. We're not breaking through, he muttered, emptying the mag and ducking behind a pulsing pillar. This guy's a walking tank. The demon stalked forward, blade dragging against the ground like a guillotine waiting to rise. Inigo, we need ideas. Lyra called out. Hold on, he yelled, slapping a fresh mag into the rifle. He peeked around the side and opened fire again, short bursts carefully aimed. Sparks flared. Tiny shards broke from the armor at each strike. Not useless but far from enough. He needed more. Something bigger. Inigo clenched his teeth, ducking behind the pillar again and raising his left hand. A flicker of golden light danced between his fingers as he summoned the interface. Freedom Shop, system accessed. A translucent screen materialized before his eyes. The list flicked rapidly as he scrolled through, his mind racing. Come on. Something heavier. Something big. Then he found it. M61 Vulcan Rotary Cannon, 8,000 tokens. The image shimmered. A 6-barreled beast of pure destruction. Chambered in 20 mm, air-cooled, electric-powered. Capable of spitting 6,000 rounds a minute. His eyes widened. Perfect. Confirm purchase. Yes, he whispered. Do it. Purchase confirmed. Balance. 256,342 tokens. Then. Ammunition bundle, 10,000 rounds, 20 mm. 2,000 tokens. Purchase confirmed. Remaining balance. 252,342 tokens. The world around him snapped back into focus. Cover me, he shouted. I've got something. What? Ariane grunted, launching a burst of electricity at the demon that did little more than spark against its breastplate. Just do it. Inigo ducked and ran to the far edge of the chamber, yanking an orb from his side pouch, his summoning marker. He slammed it into the ground. With a sudden surge of light, metal materialized from thin air, thick armor plating, hydraulic limbs, and spinning barrels emerged in sequence. The M61 Vulcan burst into existence with a hydraulic hiss and a heavy metallic thud. An ammo pod followed behind it, already linked by a belt of 20 mm rounds. The machine clicked into standby. Let's see if he can tank this. The barrels began to spin with a mechanical whine. The demon noticed. It turned its gaze toward the weapon, just in time for the Vulcan to fire. The chamber roared to life. Thunder cracked in rapid-fire succession as the Vulcan's barrels spewed hot metal death. Each round hit like a hammer, smashing into the demon's chest and shoulders with terrifying force. Chunks of armor flew. Cracks spiderwebbed across the black plating. Yes. Inigo shouted, grinning wildly. The demon staggered. One knee buckled. It raised its arm to shield itself, but the Vulcan kept chewing, rounds tearing through its guard. A round clipped the side of its helmet, ripping the horn clean off. It roared, a deep, guttural, distorted sound that rattled the walls. Korik, now upright and furious, charged forward with a renewed yell. He swung his blade down on the demon's weakened knee. This time it cracked. The limb buckled. Keep hitting it. Inigo called out. Lyra leapt up onto a broken pillar and rained down arrows on the exposed joints. Ariane summoned spears of force, driving them into gaps in the demon's armor. The Vulcan roared continuously, chewing into the demon's side. But the monster didn't fall. Instead, with a furious howl, it lunged, barreling through the line of fire and slamming its sword down into the Vulcan itself. Steel met steel. The Vulcan was torn apart in a single blow. Barrels twisted, ammo pod ruptured, the machine sparking and failing with a high-pitched shriek. The cannon was destroyed. But it had done its job. The demon's chest plate was shattered, its left arm hanging loose by twisted sinew. Black blood dripped from a deep gouge in its side. It was hurt. It was vulnerable. Now! Inigo shouted, rushing in with his rifle raised. He unloaded a fresh mag directly into the exposed wound, every round bursting deep into the creature's core. Ariane followed with a chain of magic that wrapped around the demon's sword arm and locked it down, just long enough for Korik to leap onto its back and drive his sword into the base of its neck. Lyra, silent as a ghost, planted one final arrow, directly through the glowing slit in its helmet. The demon gave a single shudder, then dropped. The ground shook when it hit. For a moment no one said anything. Then Korik exhaled sharply and dropped down beside the body, panting. "Tell me we don't have to fight another one of those." "Not unless they've got a twin," Inigo muttered, slinging his rifle. He looked down at the broken Vulcan and sighed. "Worth every token." "Token?" Ariane tilted her head to the side. "What do you mean?" "Nothing." Inigo dismissed her curiosity. "Anyways, we need to deal with that summoner." The summoner had retreated there. "Then this is not over. We push in 2 minutes. I have a huge feeling about this, that this is the base of operations of the demon race." They did. With the carcass of the demon behind them and the path ahead glowing with eldritch fire, the team regrouped, healed and moved forward. One trial down. The air grew hotter with every step they took. Beyond the corpse of the armored demon, the corridor twisted into a descending spiral. The walls here bled. Not metaphorically, rivulets of thick, steaming ichor oozed from the living stone, dripping into shallow channels along the floor. The light dimmed to a bloody hue, pulsing in time with the unnatural heartbeat of the tower itself. "I don't like this," Lyra muttered. "It's like we're walking into a throat." "Then let's hope it doesn't close on us," Korik grunted, gripping his greatsword tighter. Inigo moved point, rifle raised, eyes locked through the scope. His pulse hadn't settled since the last fight. The Vulcan had done its job, but the fact that something so powerful was just the gatekeeper? This place was more than a stronghold. It was a factory. A forge of nightmares. "We're deep into their territory now," Ariane said. Her voice was low, her hands glowing faintly with residual energy. "I can feel the concentration of magic. It's not just ambient. It's directed. Focused." "Toward what?" Inigo asked without looking back. "A source. A nexus." She hesitated. "Something is generating the rift from this side. Feeding it." The tunnel widened abruptly, opening into a vast chamber. It was circular, with walls ribbed like the inside of a cavernous shell. Hanging from the ceiling were dozens of fleshy pods, some twitching, others still. Below them, pools of black liquid steamed, filling the chamber with a sulfuric fog. Then the first creature dropped. It hit the ground with a sickening splat. A quadruped demon with a chitinous body, long bladed limbs, and a head that split open sideways to reveal rows of serrated fangs. 3 more fell behind it. Then 5. Then dozens. "Get ready," Inigo shouted, taking a firing stance. Ariane lighted up. She didn't need further instruction. With a cry, she flung out both arms and unleashed a wave of radiant heat. The fog ignited instantly, flames spreading across the pools and catching several of the creatures mid-leap. The beast shrieked in pain, but more came. Korik roared and met the charge with brutal precision, cleaving through the lead beast and spinning to catch another as it leapt from his side. Lyra moved higher, climbing a warped ledge along the wall and unleashing a hail of arrows tipped with explosive glyphs. Inigo's M4 cracked with controlled bursts. The 5.56 rounds tore through the thinner-skinned ones, but others, bulkier, armored with bone-like plates, shrugged off the impacts. "Armor's getting tougher," he called out. "We need to push through," Ariane said. "This is a spawning chamber. They're just going to keep coming." Inigo gritted his teeth. "Give me 30 seconds. He fell back, slamming behind a warped outcropping of stone. He flicked open the system interface again. Freedom Shop, accessing Arsenal. His fingers flew through the holographic menu. Item: XM214 microgun, 5,000 tokens. Too small. Item: AT-4 anti-tank rocket, 3,000 tokens. Tempting but too slow. Then he saw it. Item: MB32 multiple grenade launcher, 4,500 tokens. He tapped confirm. Purchase confirmed. Balance: 247,842 tokens. A pulse of light surged into his hands, and there it was. Compact. Deadly. Loaded with 6 high-explosive 40mm grenades. Let's make a hole. Inigo returned to the fray, kneeling atop a stone ridge. He aimed at the thickest concentration of beasts and pulled the trigger. Thump, 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 thump. Each explosion rocked the chamber, fire and gore flying in every direction. Limbs scattered. A chunk of ceiling collapsed, crushing several more. There. Ariane pointed to a tunnel beyond the pit. We push through that. Korik led the charge, bloodied and unrelenting. Lyra leapt down and flanked left, her daggers flashing as she cut through the weakened survivors. Inigo kept pace, launching another 6 grenades into their rear to prevent pursuit. By the time they reached the exit tunnel, only smoke and the stench of charred flesh remained behind them. They didn't stop. The corridor sloped downward, eventually leading to a strange set of steps. Each stair seemed to warp under their feet, bending, elongating, compressing, like the geometry of the tower was breaking the laws of physics. They reached a wide balcony overlooking a vast chamber far below. What they saw froze them. An army. Not metaphorical. Not an exaggeration. Thousands of demons milled in a vast arena-sized cavern. Varied in shape and size. Some small, others titanic, some winged, others slithering. They moved in ranks as if organized. At the far end stood a black throne on a spire of bone. But the message was clear. This is a staging ground, Lyra whispered. Inigo clenched his fists. They're preparing to invade. No, Ariane said slowly, they're waiting. For a signal. Or someone's return. The summoner, Inigo said grimly. As if on cue, the shadows behind them stirred. From a crack in the wall, another creature emerged. Something less brute, more sleek. Humanoid in shape but skinless, nerves exposed, muscles twitching. It screeched in a sound like metal screaming underwater. And it was fast. It darted at them in a blink. Inigo sidestepped and fired. The rounds grazed its shoulder but it barely noticed. Korik moved to intercept but it rolled low and kicked him aside. Focus fire. Inigo shouted, bringing up his MGL again and firing point blank at its retreating back. The explosion sent it flying, but it recovered midair, landing in a crouch. Ariane muttered a quick incantation and cast a hex of binding. Black chains erupted from the floor and wrapped around the creature's limbs, but only held it for a second before it tore free with a snarl. Then it vanished. No, above. Lyra shouted. The creature had leapt, clinging to the ceiling like a spider. Inigo swapped to rifle and fired upward. The rounds chipped the stone but missed. Lyra loosed an arrow, a blinding one. It struck true, flashing bright white and stunning the beast mid-cling. Fell. Korik was already waiting. With a grunt, he caught the thing mid-fall with an uppercut swing that severed its midsection clean. The body hit the ground and writhed. It wasn't dead yet. Inigo approached, switched to single shot and put 3 enchanted rounds through its skull. It stopped twitching. Whatever that was, Korik growled, it was a scout. Testing our reflexes. They're getting smarter, Lyra added. No, Ariane corrected. They're watching. Again. Inigo looked toward the arena again. Nothing moved below. But he felt it. Eyes. Hundreds of them. And above, in the shadows of the spire, a soft violet glow began to pulse. They know we're here now, he said quietly. The final layer's waiting. We rest here, Ariane said. Only a few minutes. Then we go. Inigo nodded and set down his weapons. His hands trembled, but not from fear. From adrenaline. The war hadn't even begun yet. And this tower wasn't the end. It was just the door. The corridor ahead narrowed into a throat-like tunnel, slick with the same pulsing organic tissue that lined the walls. Every step was squelch and suction as if the tower itself resisted their passage. The air grew hotter, more humid, and every breath tasted like old blood and rot. "Feels like we're walking into something's stomach," Korik muttered, sword at the ready, his armor still smeared with black ichor from the last fight. Inigo walked at point, M4 carbine raised, scanning ahead. The corridor twisted left, then right, then dropped slightly into a widening chamber. His boots stuck slightly with each step as if the floor wanted to drag him down and keep him there. Lyra and Ariane followed silently, the latter casting faint barrier pulses as they moved. As they entered the new chamber, it became clear this wasn't just another passage. It was a lair. The room opened up into a hollow dome with rib-like structures arching overhead, meeting at a central fleshy knot that dripped viscous fluid. Platforms made of bone and metal jutted from the walls, while dozens of hanging cocoons swung slowly from the ceiling, each faintly glowing from within. The air buzzed with power, dark, throbbing magic that coiled around them like invisible smoke. "We're not alone," Lyra whispered, eyes on the ceiling. He was right. One of the cocoons ruptured with a sickening wet tear, and something dropped to the ground with a thud. It stood on 4 reverse-jointed legs, its elongated arms tipped with scythe-like blades that clacked against the floor. Its head was like a horned skull with rows of tiny violet eyes along the jawline. Muscles pulsed visibly under exposed skin. Another dropped. Then another. Soon 6 of them surrounded the adventurers, circling slowly. "They're not like the others," Ariane said, stepping back. "No rot. No decay. These things aren't fresh. They were bred for this," Inigo said grimly. He flicked his rifle to full auto. Weapons free. The moment the first shot cracked from his M4, the demons lunged. Fast. Too fast. Korik took the charge head-on, swinging upward and cleaving one clean through the midsection, but another pounced from the side and slashed across his pauldrons, knocking him down. Lyra's arrow embedded into a demon's chest, but the creature didn't flinch. It kept moving. Ariane raised both hands and unleashed a shockwave that bought them space. Inigo dropped to one knee and opened fire, bursts of enchanted 5.56 tearing into the nearest creature. This time the rounds worked, at least partially. Chunks of flesh tore off, but the beast didn't stop until 3 more rounds took out both legs. Collapsed, twitching. "Center mass doesn't drop, he shouted. "Go for joints or the spine." Lyra nodded, adjusting her aim, loosing 2 arrows in rapid succession. The first took a beast in the kneecap, shattering it. The second pierced an eye socket, dropping another. Still they kept coming. 2 leapt for Ariane, but she threw a barrier up just in time. They hit it like glass, shattering with a hiss of magic, but Ariane stumbled back, drained. 6 more, dropping from above, she cried. The cocoon clusters were opening one after another, raining down fresh horrors. Inigo gritted his teeth, dropping his now empty mag and slamming in another. "Too many. We need to bottleneck them." He sprinted toward a narrow corridor on the far side of the chamber, motioning for the others. "Fall back now." Korik, bleeding but mobile, covered the rear as they moved. Ariane hurled arcane spikes to slow the creatures, while Lyra covered the side angles with quick precision shots. Inigo paused at the mouth of the corridor, turned, and emptied another half mag into the mass of chittering demons sprinting toward them. They poured into the corridor. Exactly what he wanted. He raised his left hand again. "Freedom Shop. Accessed." His interface blinked into view, flickering briefly with the strain of battle around him. He searched quickly. He needed area denial. Something nasty. There. M202 flash rocket launcher, 6,000 tokens. Ammo pack. Napalm rockets X4, 1,500 tokens. Perfect. Confirm. Purchase confirmed. Balance. 244,842 tokens. A shimmer of light, and the M202 materialized in his hands with a satisfying weight. The quad-tube launcher glinted in the dim chamber light, loaded and primed. He stepped forward and aimed at the corridor. "Inigo, what the hell is that?" Ariane yelled, eyes widening. He smirked. "Clear path." He pulled the trigger. 4 fiery rockets screamed down the corridor in quick succession. They hit the ground mid-charge and detonated. The explosion was instantaneous. Napalm flooded the tunnel with roaring flame, sticking to everything it touched. The charging demons were engulfed, their shrieks deafening as the flames consumed them. The corridor became a furnace. The shockwave sent the team stumbling, but it was worth it. When the smoke cleared, nothing moved. The smell of cooked flesh filled the air, thick and choking. "Holy shit," Korik said, coughing. "That'll do." Inigo dropped the spent launcher and slung his rifle. "They'll think twice before flanking us now." "No, they won't," Ariane said quietly. "Look." Inigo turned. From the center of the chamber, beneath the dangling cocoon clusters, a shape emerged. Unlike the others, this one was massive. 12 feet tall, hunched, plated in natural armor, its arms longer than its legs and its eyes glowing bright blue. A crown of bone curved backward from its skull like a stag's antlers. It stepped forward with deliberate purpose, claws dragging across the floor. Every step echoed like a drumbeat. "A royal," Lyra whispered. "Or worse," Ariane breathed. "An alpha." The monster roared. And the walls answered. From every surface, ceiling, floor, even behind bone plates, more figures began emerging. Smaller than the alpha but more agile, their movements spider-like. Inigo could see it in their eyes. Hive behavior. They weren't just attacking randomly. They were being directed. "Fall back to the ridge," he barked. "There's a kill zone there." They moved fast, crossing the ruined chamber and climbing a slight incline of stone and bone that gave them elevation. Inigo dropped to prone and deployed his last sentry, an automortar drone he had been saving. XM-174 automortar. 9,000 tokens. Confirm purchase. Yes. The machine materialized, spinning up with a clunk as it locked into position. He fed in a belt of high-explosive shells and set the targeting range. The HUD blinked green. Fire pattern, converging. The drone whined, then thumped loudly. Shells launched overhead in precise arcs. They detonated mid-path, sending shockwaves and shrapnel into the advancing swarm. Lyra knelt beside him, firing arrows into the chaos. Korik and Ariane flanked the slope, pushing down any creature that managed to get close. The alpha roared again and leapt. Straight toward them. Inigo barely rolled aside in time as the monster slammed down where he'd been, its claws gouging the rock. Korik tackled it from the side, swinging wildly. It threw him off like paper. Inigo aimed for the eyes. One clean burst. 3 rounds hit home. The creature shrieked, staggered. Ariane unleashed a shock lance that fried half its chest plate. Lyra's arrows came in pairs. One to distract, one to maim. Then Inigo charged forward, leapt onto its back and shoved a plasma grenade under the plates of its neck. "Choke on this," he growled and jumped off. The grenade detonated. The alpha dropped to one knee, howling in pain. Korik rushed again, blade high, and drove it deep into the exposed spine. The alpha fell. And the swarm stopped. Frozen. Then, like insects without a queen, they scattered. Fled. Crawled into the shadows. Silence. Heavy, dreadful silence. Inigo panted, dropping to one knee. "That was too close." "We keep pushing," Ariane said hoarsely. This was their inner nest. Inigo looked ahead. There was a door. Massive, sealed with violet chains that pulsed in rhythm with something. No, someone, on the other side. "We're almost there," he muttered. Lyra looked at him. "You sure you're ready for what's beyond that?" Inigo nodded slowly. "Doesn't matter if I am. We finish this." And together they approached the final gate. The great gate pulsed in the dark like a living thing. Its violet chains writhed as though sensing their approach, humming with energy that made the skin crawl. It wasn't just magic, it was layered intent. A will behind the warding, alien and suffocating, watching them, judging them. Inigo stepped forward first, his boots squelching on the blood-slick floor. His M4 was ready, mag-topped, his grip tight. "Whatever's beyond this," he muttered, "it knows we're here." "I feel it," Ariane said softly, her voice distant. "It's old. Too old for words. And powerful." Korik grunted and rolled his shoulders. "So was the last bastard. We dropped him, didn't we?" Lyra said nothing, but her eyes didn't leave the chains. With a sharp inhale, Inigo raised his hand and touched the surface of the gate. The moment his fingers met the outer ring, a wave of nausea hit him like a hammer. He staggered but didn't fall. Instead, the chains began to unravel. Not snap. Not break. Unravel like smoke twisting in reverse, pulled into unseen cracks that weren't there a moment ago. And then the door opened. It didn't swing or creak. It simply ceased to exist, revealing a vast chamber beyond. They stepped through, one by one, into a space that made no architectural sense. There were no walls. No ceiling. Just infinite black studded with floating shards of mirrored glass, suspended in gravity-defying arcs. Each shard showed reflections of them, and not them. Inigo saw himself in one, wearing armor he'd never owned, holding a weapon he didn't recognize. Another shard showed Ariane weeping over a grave. Korik kneeling in chains. Lyra gone entirely. What is this place? Ariane whispered. A domain, Lyra said. Her voice was steady, but her knuckles were white on her bowstring. We're inside someone's domain. As if summoned by her words, a ripple passed through the dark. And then she appeared. From the black void above, descending with impossible grace, came the Lady of Illusion. She floated rather than walked, her feet never touching the ground that wasn't there. Her robes shimmered like oil over water, dark purples, silvers, and shifting hues that refused to settle. Her face was veiled, but even through it her eyes burned like two violet stars. Her hands were bare, delicate, almost human. Almost. Ariane gasped. She's not alive. She's not undead either. No, Lyra breathed. She's something else. The lady's voice when it came was silk laced with razors. So, you are the ones who tore through my children, who scorched my nest, who dared pierce the veil of my sanctum. Inigo raised his rifle. And we'll keep going. Unless you stop us. Her head tilted slowly. I don't stop intruders. I show them truth. The mirrors began to move, rotating, shifting, circling them in dizzying spirals. With each turn the images changed. Inigo saw Lyra stabbed through the chest. Korik burning alive. Ariane choking on her own blood. Don't look. Inigo shouted. It's illusion, don't believe it. But even as he yelled, the reflections began to hurt. Lyra flinched as though struck. Korik staggered as one image showed him gutted from behind. Ariane screamed and dropped to her knees, clutching her head. She's attacking our minds. Ariane managed between sobs. Momentarily the illusions dulled. Not gone but muffled. The lady tilted her head again. So easy. She raised a hand. From the void, tendrils of blackness exploded outward, slamming into the mirrored shards, shattering them. The fragments twisted midair and formed into figures. Doppelgangers, illusions made flesh. Copies of the team. 4 perfect reflections, dressed and armed like them, down to Inigo's rifle and Korik's scar. What the? Korik didn't finish. The battle began without a signal. The mirrored Inigo opened fire, bursts ripping through the air, forcing him to dive behind a floating shard. His own rifle kicked as he returned fire, rounds ricocheting off semi-real terrain. The fake Lyra moved like the real one, fast, agile, deadly. The copy of Ariane hurled spells with frightening precision. Split them. Inigo shouted. Don't fight your own double. Korik roared and slammed into the mirrored Inigo with a shoulder charge, tackling him away. Lyra loosed 2 arrows at the fake Ariane, staggering her long enough for the real one to counter with a searing lance of light. But the lady didn't stop there. She floated above the battlefield, hands raised like a puppeteer, eyes glowing brighter with each second. Inigo fired a burst into the air, aiming for her face, but the rounds dissolved mid-flight. She's not even here, Ariane yelled. That's a projection. The real one, she's somewhere in this space. We need to find her, Inigo snapped, slamming a new mag into his rifle. Or she'll wear us down. Korik drove his blade through his doppelganger's chest, only for the figure to melt into mist and reappear elsewhere, this time behind Ariane. Move. He tackled her aside just in time. The false Inigo's rounds tore through the space where she had knelt. They regrouped behind a large floating shard. Ariane, Inigo said, can you trace her? Find the real body. She shook her head. I need time. I need quiet. Neither of which we have, Lyra muttered, knocking another arrow. Inigo looked around. The battlefield was wrong. The rules were wrong. Nothing here obeyed the real world's laws. Unless he imposed his own. He raised his left hand. The golden flicker responded. Freedom Shop. Accessed. He had time for one call. Thermal signature tracker. 2,500 tokens. Confirmed. Balance. 239,842 tokens. The device materialized in his palm. A small wrist-mounted screen with a flickering radar. He flicked it on. Amid the swirl of false readings and mirrored heat echoes, one pulse was consistent. Slightly below. Far back. So. There, he pointed. Below us, 60 meters. Ariane nodded. I'll get us there. But I'll need help. Inigo turned to the others. Korik, Lyra, cover us. Ariane and I are going for the heart. Korik grinned. About damn time. As Ariane began casting the descent spell, the lady's illusion turned her gaze directly at Inigo. He knew. And in that moment he knew too. This was no ordinary spellcaster. No common demon. This was a being born of pure perception, of illusion given dominion over flesh and mind. And she would not go quietly.